Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me okay? All right, great. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for this joint event hosted by the Delaware Association of Realtors and the Delaware Mortgage Bankers Association. My name is Wes Stefanik, and I serve as the Chief Executive Officer of the Delaware Association of Realtors. I'm also pleased to be joined today by Rich Shine, President of the Delaware Mortgage Bankers Association. He'll join the screen in just a moment here. There you are, Rich. All right, we're excited to bring our organizations together for today's program and hope this event provides valuable insight, meaningful discussion, and an opportunity for realtors, mortgage bankers, mortgage brokers to connect around the issues shaping today's housing market. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping items. Please take a moment to complete the survey following today's session, as your feedback helps us to improve these programs moving forward. In addition, if you have questions for our speaker, please feel free to place them in the chat throughout the presentation. We will reserve time at the end for question and answer. Today's featured speaker is Dr. Lisa Sturtevant, Chief Economist for Bright MLS. At Bright MLS, Lisa leads the organization's research and forecasting efforts and serves as one of the nation's leading voices on housing market trends and economic analysis. She is notably the only MLS-focused chief economist in the country. Her experience in economic, demographic, and housing market research spans more than 2 decades. Prior to joining Bright MLS, Lisa served as the chief economist for the Virginia Realtors, excuse me. She founded and led the housing consulting firm LSA Planning and held a variety of research and policy roles with nonprofit organizations and universities. Lisa earned her PhD in public policy from George Mason University, a master's degree in public policy from the University of Maryland, and a Bachelor of Science in Mathematical Economics from Wake Forest University. Before we hear from Lisa, though, I'd like to invite Rich to share a few opening remarks as well.
Thank you, Wes, and thank you everyone for joining us today. On behalf of the Delaware Mortgage Bankers Association, we are excited to partner with Delaware Association of Realtors for this call. In a market that continues to evolve, conversations like this are incredibly valuable in helping all of us better serve home buyers and homeowners across the state. We are very much looking forward to hearing what Dr. Lisa Sturtevant, her insights today. Thank you.
Thank you, Rich. And now it is our pleasure to welcome Dr. Lisa for today's session. Everyone, please join me in virtually welcoming Lisa.
Thanks, Wes. Thanks, Rich. Thank you guys very much for the chance to be here with you today. Rich, I just want to echo what you said. It is so important that all of us that are working in the industry are coming together to gather information. There's so much uncertainty out there, right? And there's so many questions that your clients are coming to you with, whether they're in the process of buying their first home or selling a home or refinancing a home. And my role here at Bright MLS is really to make sure that real estate professionals have the information that they need to be the local professional to serve your clients to help them make confident decisions. So I'm really, really pleased to be with you all today. And I'm going to share my screen and go through some of the data that we have on where we are in the housing market today, focusing really zeroing in on the Delaware housing market, on some of the local submarkets, talking about some of the factors that are affecting the housing market, and then hopefully having some time for questions and discussion to the extent that we can. Love to hear the questions and what you're seeing in the market. So let's just sort of level set on where we've been. This is nationwide data. And so the dark blue line is the number of home sales each month in 2025 in the United States. The orange line is where we are here in 2026 through April. So nationwide, 2026 home sales are tracking pretty much at where we were in 2025. At the end of last year, you may remember, and I remember very well because I did a forecast for 2026, there was a lot of optimism that 2026 would be a rebounding year, would be a transition year. Mortgage rates were going to fall. Lots of pent-up demand was out there, and it would be unleashed in the market as more sellers began listing and more buyers were brought into the market by lower mortgage rates. But unfortunately, it's been a pretty slow start to 2026. Mortgage rates, as you know, came down in February, but have been volatile, have been on the rise, given some of the geopolitical uncertainty and some other economic factors. And that uncertainty has really characterized the housing market in the first 4 months of 2026, leading to, let's say, slower home sales than we had originally expected. When we look at Delaware, this is the same data for Delaware. The orange line is the number of monthly home sales here in Delaware, the state. The gray, I should have mentioned, is the range of home sales that we would see each month over the last decade. So by any stretch, we are at a very low level. And in fact, February was a rough month for sales activity in Delaware. We had lower home sales than last year. We had lower home sales than the year before. We had lower home sales than any other year over the last decade in February. Part of that was the uncertainty that I mentioned. We also dealt with some winter weather, and here in the Mid-Atlantic, we don't always handle winter weather so great. So cold weather, snow, uncertainty led to a pretty rough start to the beginning of 2026. Year to date, sales are 7.7% lower than they were a year ago. These are closed sales, sales that have gone to settlement and are closed. And you can see that sales are down year to date in all three of the counties across the state. So a slow start, but there is a little bit of good news, I think, on the horizon. So we also track not just closed sales, but we also track the number of new contracts, right? So these are homes where there is an offer and the home is in a pending status or active under contract status, and it's sort of a preview of where closed sales are headed. And after a slow start to the year in the first quarter, pending sales were up in April. And so compared to a year ago, new pending contracts in April were slightly above of where we were last April. Now, year to date, we're still tracking below, but there are some signs that the spring market, which typically gets geared up in March, may have been delayed a little bit. And so those buyers are coming out in April, and there's a little bit of momentum in the housing market. And the question is whether that momentum is going to carry through the rest of the spring and into the summer, and what factors might be tailwinds to encourage more housing market activity, and which factors might be headwinds, sort of putting the brakes on the housing market. And so those are some of the things that we're going to talk about, we're going to look at. As far as home prices go, home price growth has slowed here in Delaware. So this chart shows the year-over-year change in the median sold price going back to 2000. And you can see in 2021, 2022, home prices were rising at 10, 15, even 20% year over year. Really an unsustainable level of home price growth. More recently, while home prices are still overall rising, home price growth has slowed quite a bit. These lines show sort of a smooth 12-month moving average of home price growth, with the dark blue line being Sussex County, having the fastest price appreciation during the pandemic. And you can see where we are now in 2026. Home prices are pretty flat in Sussex County. And our data include mostly existing home sales or resale homes. We do have some new construction in there, so all of that is included in this price data. You can see in Kent County, the orange line, a similar pattern where prices are much lower. Price growth is lower than it was. But in Newcastle County, we didn't have quite the big uptick in home price appreciation during the pandemic, and so it's a little bit more stable. So home prices are not growing as fast as they were before, and that's actually a good thing, right? We know that affordability has been a major constraint keeping some buyers out of the market. So if home prices start growing more slowly, and if incomes are growing more quickly than home prices are growing, then that improves affordability, even without a change in mortgage rates, which we'll talk about later. But incomes growing faster than home prices will help ease affordability and can bring more buyers into the market. And I think that's sort of the transition period that we're in. Even if you own a home right now and you look at this and you're like, gosh, I'm not sure I want home prices to start growing more slowly because I like having a lot of value in my home. The fact is, most homeowners are going to sell their home at some point, and we need home prices to be tracking kind of more closely to incomes so that there can be a buyer for your home when it is time to sell. So, home price growth slowing, it's an adjustment that's necessary to kind of undo the logjam that we have in the housing market. There's no risk on the horizon of any major price corrections. This is not 2008. The situation is vastly different, but we will see much softer prices in the months ahead. The softer price growth has also been associated with a slightly longer time that homes are taking to sell. So this is the median days on market, which measures the time it takes from a home to be listed on the MLS to go under a contract. And you can see the blue line again, Sussex, orange line, Kent County, gray line, Newcastle County. Homes are taking a little bit longer to sell, certainly than they did in 2021, 2022. But we're still sort of a quicker market than we were back in 2016, 2017. And that's really important for those of you working with home buyers who may be hearing kind of national reports that the housing market is cooling, that the housing market's slowing, that it's becoming a buyer's market and buyers have lots of choices. It really does depend on not only the market that you're in, the local market you're in, but also kind of what price point you're looking at, what product type you're looking at. And in places like, for example, Newcastle County, you can see the median days on market is still about 10, which means that half of all homes that sold in April sold in 10 days or less. And that's still pretty quick and still far below normal. So I often get asked, like, is it still a seller's market? Are we moving towards a balanced market? Is it a buyer's market? For the realtors on the call, we used to use kind of months of supply to determine whether it was a balanced market, right? We said 4 to 6 months of supply was indication of a balanced market, but that's kind of a tricky measure when the market is transitioning. It's kind of a math problem, honestly. Months of supply is calculated by taking current inventory and dividing it by the average transactions over the last 12 months. But when things are changing, sometimes using the average over the last 12 months is not a great measure. I do like to look at how long properties take to sell. And until we see this back up to where we were in 2016, 2017, 2018, I think that's when we'll start to call it more of a balanced market. So the key takeaway here is market specific, but we are moving towards a market that's in better balance where sellers and buyers are going to have more equivalent leverage in the market. One reason why it has been so strongly a seller's market for so long is simply that inventory has been very low. And inventory, this is for Delaware, it's the number of active listings on the market at the end of each month, going back to 2019 across the whole state. And supply is increasing. You can see that in April of 2026, overall inventory was up about 7% across the state, with inventory up 14% in Newcastle, up close to 10% in Kent County, in Sussex, inventory growing a little bit more slowly year over year, but still we're seeing more inventory coming onto the market. And that is also a sign that the market is, there's a reason to think that the sort of stalled logjam housing market that we've been in can start to loosen up a little bit because a lack of inventory, frankly, has been a major constraint on home sales activity. Mortgage rates, affordability, for sure, are on people's minds, but for many, simply not being able to find a home to put an offer on has been one of the main reasons home sales activity has been so low. And you can see, even though inventory is on the rise, which is good, we're still low compared to historic standards. So if you look back at April of 2019, before the disruption caused by the pandemic, we still have 25% fewer listings on the market now than we did back in 2019. And that inventory deficit is biggest in Newcastle, where inventory is 40% lower, 41% lower than it was back in 2019. So again, while there is a movement towards more of a balanced market, it depends on where you are. And it also is still true that buyers have fewer options to choose from now than they did back 7 years ago before the pandemic, meaning that in many markets, it's still a pretty tight market. There is a little bit of good news, I think, on the horizon. One reason why inventory hasn't gotten back up to where we were in 2019 is that home sellers are staying put, right? And there's a few different reasons for that. One of the main reasons that we've heard a lot about is this idea of rate lock. Homeowners who have a mortgage rate below 4%, below 4.5%, who don't want to give up that super low mortgage rate and sell their home and have to buy another home at a much higher rate. So that rate lock has been one explanation for why listing activity has been low. And you can see in January and February, the number of new listings coming onto the market in Delaware was below where we were last year. It was actually in February the lowest level on record in Delaware. Not just you guys, it's actually the lowest level like across the Mid-Atlantic. Again, I think weather had a little bit to do with that, but that rate lock has been sort of the story of the limited supply over the last couple of years. But I do see signs that it's loosening up, and it's not because people love the fact that rates are still close to 6.5%. But the fact of the matter is, changing family and financial circumstances are the primary reason why somebody decides to sell a home. And even if you have a sub 3% mortgage rate, I will tell you, if you have a two-bedroom home and you just had your second child, or your third child, sometimes you're going to throw your hands up and say, well, I'm going to give up this low rate and I'm going to roll the tremendous amount of equity I probably have in my home into the purchase of a new home, sort of in essence, buying down that higher rate. So while rate lock is still a thing, I think those changing family and financial situations are going to prompt more of these pent-up sellers, right? People who've been wanting to sell to list their home on the market. And we saw a nice bump in new listing activity in March, and in April, a little bit higher than it would have been in a normal April. And year to date, new listings are still down in Sussex County, which is sort of bringing down the whole state. But we are seeing promising signs from sellers as more new listings coming onto the market. And so the question is, this momentum we're seeing in new contracts in April, the momentum we're seeing in some upward trends in new listing activity, will that continue throughout the rest of the spring and into the summer? And I always say forecasting the housing market is hard in the best of times. And right now it's really, really challenging. But we know that the things that drive the housing market are demographics, which we'll talk a little bit about, but also the economy. So let's take a little bit of a look at where we are in the economy and how this current economic context that we're in could affect home sales activity in the weeks and months to come. Let's take a first look at the labor market. So this chart shows the number of jobs added to the US economy each month, and the orange line is sort of the average of where we'd been before the pandemic, sort of a typical amount. As you can see, job growth has slowed considerably since the pandemic, which makes sense. But overall, the labor market is bouncing around a little bit and it's softening a little bit, and there is some uncertainty, but there's no signs of any sort of major pullback in hiring or any major pullback in economic activity. The unemployment rate has been pretty stable. The unemployment rate is still at 4.3%, which is low by historic standards. So we're sort of in a new normal of slower job growth, low unemployment, still have a relatively tight labor market. If the labor market started to weaken considerably, right, with job losses, with lots of layoffs, then we would likely see the Federal Reserve cut interest rates at their next meeting. But the fact that the labor market is still a little unclear, a little cloudy, and is resilient in some parts of the labor market, wages are rising, well, except for April. Wages had been rising more quickly than inflation. So this means that as the Federal Reserve sort of looks at this labor market picture, it doesn't seem like it's going to scream out for a rate cut. At the same time, gross domestic product, the economy grew at 2% in the first quarter, which is lower than we saw at the end of last year, but still not terrible, steady, resilient. This is where the other piece of the Federal Reserve puzzle comes in, and which is actually, I think, is sort of the problematic piece of the economy right now, and that's inflation. This shows overall inflation in the US, and you can see back in 2002, we saw inflation hit nearly 9%, and inflation came down very quickly as the Federal Reserve raised interest rates, right? The Federal Reserve raises interest rates in period of high inflation because inflation is being driven by the fact that we all want to go out and buy more stuff. And when lots of people want to go buy more stuff or businesses want to buy more stuff, and there's not more stuff to buy, that leads prices to go up. There are some weird parts of the economy like oil prices, which we'll come to, but in general, the tool that the Federal Reserve has to tackle high inflation is to raise interest rates to make it more expensive to buy stuff, to make us buy less stuff, and then inflation will come down. And that is in fact what happened. And that's why interest rates were raised. And so the idea is once inflation gets back down to its 2% target, which it had been heading towards, that would give the Federal Reserve room to cut interest rates back down, to lower interest rates. And inflation seemed to be on the right trajectory with stable job market, inflation coming back down to 2%. We could have expected the Federal Reserve to cut rates multiple times in 2026. The problem is at the end of this chart here, you can see inflation has started to move back up. Inflation in April was 3.8%. That's the highest level of inflation in 3 years. And the primary driver of higher inflation has been the conflict in the Middle East, rising oil prices, rising gas prices, rising energy prices. But we actually are still in a period where even if inflation, price growth in other parts of the economy is a little bit lower, we're still seeing groceries higher, we're still seeing rents higher, we're still seeing the cost of education, healthcare higher. And with inflation moving higher, it raises questions for what the Fed's going to do, but it also makes consumers' economic situations feel less certain. And unless and until the conflict with the Middle East gets resolved in a way that frees up more energy supply and makes energy move more easily throughout the world, I anticipate we'll still see inflation elevated. I don't think we'll see inflation back down to 2% until we get the conflict to a resolution. The silver lining, the bright spot, had been the fact that even with inflation above its 2% target, which you can see there in the light green line, since 2024, wages have been rising more quickly than inflation. So, there's a cumulative effect of inflation where stuff just feels much more expensive, but we're starting to make progress as wages started to rise more quickly than the overall rate of inflation. When wages rise faster than inflation, it takes a little bit of time, but people start to feel more confident. But that reversed in April, where wage growth was slower than inflation. And that is putting a pause on some people's decision making, particularly about buying and selling a home. At the same time, we've been watching mortgage rates, and this shows data from Freddie Mac on the average rate of a 30-year fixed rate mortgage. New data came in today, and the weekly average was 6.36%, basically unchanged from last week when it was 6.37%. You can see here that rates hit historic lows back in early 2021, and then we saw mortgage rates rise as the Federal Reserve raised the federal funds rate. And we had started to see mortgage rates come back down at the end of last year. Early this year, we had this one shining optimistic week in February when, according to Freddie Mac, the average rate was below 6%. But that quickly reversed again as the conflict in Iran escalated. Uncertain markets don't like uncertainty, and so with the uncertainty brought about by this just like geopolitical situation, we saw mortgage rates on the rise and really very uncertain. Some weeks they've been higher, some weeks they've been lower. It has been my belief that we don't necessarily need mortgage rates to be quote unquote low, right? There was a while, right, in 2021, 2022, where consumers were still hoping for 3% mortgage rates. And I don't think anybody is banking on a 3% rate anytime soon. there was this thought that, maybe 6% was the magic number. If rates fall below 6%, that'll be sort of a psychological signal, and more buyers will hop into the market. More sellers will be willing to give up their low rate if they can get something with a 5 handle. I think what we really need right now is just a little bit of stability. I think mortgage rates are going to stay in this 6.3 to 6.5% range here for the next few weeks and maybe months. And I think I'm not sure that that's necessarily a bad thing for the housing market if there can be some certainty around where rates are going to be so that consumers for plan. The worst thing that's been happening is when prospective home buyers go and get qualified at a certain rate, and then a few weeks later, rates are higher and the math doesn't work anymore. And so I think as we look ahead to where mortgage rates are going to go, I think rather than focusing on a certain number, I think more about stability. Although I will say, if rates fall below 6% and the labor market's still doing okay, I think we will see a rush of home buyers and sellers. I think conversely, if we see rates above 6.5% and heading towards 7, I think that could also be a psychological factor and keep people from being in the market. So I think this 6.3 to 6.5, I think this is the sweet spot for us for right now. And if we continue to see home prices rising more slowly than incomes, we see affordability start to improve as price growth moderates, I think we could see steady home sales activity in 2026. Is it going to be a boom year? Is it going to be a banner year for the housing market? Absolutely not. Still another transition year, still another tough year, particularly for first-time home buyers. I'd mentioned I think rates are going to remain in kind of this range of 6.3 to 6.5. It's possible they could go higher. It's possible they could go lower. Mortgage rates tend to follow yields on the 10-year Treasury. And when the economy is uncertain, Treasury yields rise. And as you know, we've had a lot of uncertainty in the economy right now. And so if Treasury yields rise, we could see mortgage rates rise. But if there is some signal, and we've been fooled before, but if there's some signal that there is a resolution in the Middle East and the market takes that as truth, we could see yields fall. We could see mortgage rates come down. This is oil prices. This chart goes back to September, just to put it in context. So we saw oil prices rising really rapidly in March. And that's, as I've mentioned, was a main driver of inflation. So, if stuff gets moving and oil prices start to come down, inflation comes down, more certainty, we could actually see mortgage rates move lower. My bet, as I mentioned, is that we're in this 6.3 to 6.5% range for the foreseeable future, unless there's some resolution to the geopolitical conflict. That's the national picture. In Delaware itself, we can see month over month job change. And we can see job growth has been pretty tepid over the last few months. Delaware attracts a lot of second home buyers, a lot of retirees. But the bulk of the housing market is driven by people in the labor market. And so it's just something to watch. Unemployment was on the rise. It plateaued a little bit. And it's, again, something to watch. So, again, sort of like the US economy, a little bit uncertain. No major warning signs in the Delaware economy. But certainly something to watch as we go forward, because when people feel uncertain about their jobs, they're much less likely to do big things like buy or sell a home. The last thing I'm watching is also related to sort of economic security, how good people are feeling about their economic pictures. The good news on this slide is the blue line. And you can see this is showing delinquency rates going back to 2016. The blue line is the share of mortgages that are delinquent. I should have written on whether this is 30-day or 90-day. I'll get back to you and make sure I know for sure. But the trend is the fact that delinquency rates on mortgages are still lower than they were before the pandemic, period, full stop. So there's been some media reports about foreclosures, rising significantly year over year, or delinquency up substantially year over year. But as I like to tell folks, even if something increases by 100% year over year, but it was zero in the first year, it's 100% increase is still pretty much zero. So these big numbers that are being reported sort of belie what's really happening. And what's really happening right now is the mortgage market seems pretty stable, and there's no big risk of foreclosure activity or short sales or anything like that. The big difference between now and like when we were back in 2008 is the $35 trillion in housing equity that US homeowners have right now. So there are relatively few homeowners who would be forced to sell their home in a foreclosure or in a short sale if they faced some sort of financial challenge, health expenses, or a family matter. They have equity to tap into to take a little bit of time to list and sell their home. So the first step is not short sale. The first step is not foreclosure. And so I think and then there's probably a buyer for their home out there because inventory, particularly in Delaware, is still below pre-pandemic levels. So I'm not worried about the housing market in terms of delinquency or foreclosure. But you can see the other lines are other measures of consumer credit. And you can see delinquencies on credit cards are higher than it was prior to the pandemic. Delinquencies on consumer loans, which includes auto loans, are higher than they were prior to the pandemic. So people are feeling the pinch of economic anxiety and concern, and we're seeing delinquency on the rise. And that is sort of the context that you're meeting your clients, and many of them are concerned about their overall economic picture. And so it's kind of where we are. Just going to end here with the sort of where we think we might be going. It's really a complicated housing market right now. And I think the most important thing that I try to convey is it's really hard, it's impossible to know exactly where things are headed, but I think it's important to pay attention to those fundamentals. The economic insecurity is a key driver, but there's also a lot of favorable factors in the housing market right now, and it's a little bit of a tug of war between some of these factors. There is significant pent-up demand for homeownership in the US housing market. In fact, if you were to go back to, let's say, before the 2004, 2006 run up, before the pandemic, and look at homeownership rates in the year 2000, which was 26 years ago, which is crazy. If homeownership rates now were the same as they were back in 2000, we would have 2.4 million more homeowners in America right now. That is a significant amount of pent-up demand. For the last few years in the US, we've been averaging around 4 million home sales annually. That is far below the long-term average. The long-term average is 5.2 million home sales of existing homes. This is not even new construction. Sales of existing homes nationally. And we've been far below that for the last few years. Now, we had a run up during the pandemic where we had sales over 6 million. So there's a little bit of offset there, but there is still significant demand for homeownership in the market. And the question is sort of like, when will this demand be unleashed onto the housing market? And I think it will come as home price growth slows, wages grow faster than home prices, and mortgage rates stabilize. I think those are the factors that we need to bring more homeowners into the market and more sellers, right? Because sellers, 3/4 of sellers are also home buyers. So that's why I talk specifically about buyers, but we also need people to list their home for sale so that there's inventory out there for home buyers. Delaware is a very attractive state. There are a lot of states that have actually lost population or would have lost population had it not been for immigration, international migration. And as we know, international immigration is down. So there are some communities around the country that are actually seeing population losses because they're seeing more people move out than move in. But that hasn't been the case in Delaware. Delaware is a strong migrant magnet. In fact, in 2024, which is the latest data we have, more people moved into Delaware than moved out of Delaware. You can see the top states that people move into Delaware from: Maryland, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, and Virginia. So particularly coming from the north, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, we're looking at places where the cost of living is higher, where home prices are higher, where the tax structure might not be as advantageous. So you're seeing people attracted here into Delaware, both second home and retiree folks, but also people looking to come and set up primary residence and work in the state. There were people who left the state, as always happens, and going to nearby states like Pennsylvania, Maryland, and New Jersey, simply because most people, when they move close by. But you can also see people moving down to Florida, moving down to Virginia. But in general, the state has benefited from positive net migration really for the last couple of decades. And that will still be another sort of favorable check mark in terms of housing market activity in 2026. I did mention that there's a lot of pent-up demand in the market, and another measure of that is something that we get from our surveys of real estate agents. So we survey agents that worked with a home buyer on a deal in the last month, and we survey these active agents every single month. And consistently, we're hearing that 2/3 of realtors in the Bright footprint, and the Bright footprint extends from New Jersey all the way down to Central Virginia, so 6 states plus DC. But we're finding across that footprint, 2/3 of agents were working with a client who decided to stop looking. They just decided to pause. And most of these people aren't out of the housing market altogether. They haven't thrown up their hands and saying, I'm never going to buy a home. But instead, they are sitting back and waiting. And what are they waiting for? Well, when we ask, why did your client pause their home search? The biggest obstacle was home prices, right? Affordability, not being able to find a home in their price range, which is a combination of inventory and prices. Not being able to find the right home was the second most commonly given reason. And you can see these don't add to 100. So agents could have given more than one reason. So not enough inventory. And coming in at number 3 was the fact that these people said mortgage rates were too high. That's the first quarter of 2026. If I showed you this data from last summer, mortgage rates would have been the number one reason people said they were staying out of the market. So this tells me that even though rates haven't really come down much from where they are, they're a little bit lower than they were last year. Mortgage rates aren't the obstacle as much anymore. Like, look, I know if the numbers don't pencil, they don't pencil. But there are people now here who are holding back. If mortgage rates stabilize, they just need home price growth to slow and more inventory. And we could see these buyers back in the market. Affordability is sort of a key constraint. And right now, in no county in Delaware, and spoiler alert, in almost no county in America, can the median income household afford the median priced home? So if we take Newcastle County here, in April, the median sold price was $375,000. Using Freddie Mac data, average mortgage rate in April was about 6.33%. If you I assumed a 10% down payment and some average property tax and homeowners insurance rates, and assuming a home buyer doesn't spend more than 28% of their income on housing costs each month, someone would need an income of $111,000 to qualify to purchase the median priced home in Newcastle County. And as you can see, the median household income in Newcastle County is about 91. And you can see the pattern repeats in Kent and Sussex. The gap is even broader in Sussex County, partially because, as was pointed out to me yesterday, there's a larger retiree population in Sussex County, which might bring that median household income down a little bit. But the fact of the matter is there's this gap between what people can afford and what homes are selling for. And as home price growth slows and wages grow faster than home prices, we'll start to see this affordability start to ease somewhat, which will bring some of that pent-up demand into the market. And here's the last thing I want to mention is, we often talk about home buying and selling as a financial decision, right? The biggest financial decision most people will make. It's also an emotional decision and a psychological decision. And right now, US consumers, and by consumers, I mean you and me and individuals and families out there, we're all pretty bummed on average. So this is a measure of consumer sentiment that the University of Michigan runs every month. And it's a measure of how confident people feel about their own personal financial situations. Now remember, the labor market was uncertain, but still resilient. Wages are growing faster than inflation. So the sort of objective numbers suggest we should be feeling okay. But consumer sentiment hit its lowest level this month in the entire time, nearly 50 years that the University of Michigan has been running this survey. Consumer sentiment is lower now than it was during the oil crisis of the early 1980s. Consumer sentiment is lower now than it was during the great financial crisis. It's lower than it was during the global pandemic. There has just been so much that consumers have had to deal with, and we're just feeling very anxious. And when people are anxious, they're less likely to do big things like buy or sell a home. The one upside, though, is I do believe that the current low consumer sentiment is not driven by a fear of, a major fear of an economic recession, but rather just a fatigue of affordability. Like everything's just gotten so expensive and we don't seem to be getting much relief. So again, in the housing market, if we start to see affordability improve, we will start to see more people feel a little bit more optimistic about getting out into the housing market if the other measures of the economy stay resilient. We asked this question back in December, are you worried about certain things? And there was a lot of economic anxiety out there, even back in December. And some of these concerns have only gotten more exacerbated here as gas prices have been on the rise and there a lot of uncertainty out there. And so this is the sort of context that people are coming to you to talk to. And so they are looking to you to help them get answers to the questions that they have so they can feel confident in making the right decision for them, whether it's what mortgage product to use or how to make an offer on a home, or if they're a seller, how to price their home. They are looking for you to provide that advice. And we talk a lot in the realtor community about how realtors demonstrate value to their clients. And there's a wide range of ways in which you all provide value to your clients. And it's sometimes hard to demonstrate that value in a market that's moving really fast, like it was during the pandemic. It's actually in these transitioning markets where your opportunity shines to really demonstrate your value in helping answer questions, mitigate risk, and help people feel confident in the decisions that they're making. So if I was, going to make some predictions for 2026, I think here in Delaware, we should expect this sort of delayed spring market, right? Sort of instead of March, now we're looking at April, and sort of a prolonged spring market extending into June and July, depending on, whether nothing else happens that is really hard to predict in terms of the political situation or the economic situation. I do think mortgage rates are going to stay above 6%. I do think we'll see more inventory, but there's going to be some markets where listings are going to come on, like new listing activity will increase, but there's so much demand that buyers are going to take that inventory off the market pretty quickly. It is going to be a better market now this spring than it was last spring or the spring before for buyers who are ready to buy, who have their financial ducks in a row, who are ready to make an offer. They'll have a little bit more negotiating power. And so, that's a good sign for buyers who are ready. There are a lot of wild cards, as I mentioned, watching inflation really closely. If inflation, it seems very, very, unlikely that the Federal Reserve is going to touch interest rates when they meet in June. There's, I know, a new Fed chair, and there's all this talk that the president says that this is his pick and that he wants rates to come down. But the fact of the matter is there's just little reason to think there'll be a cut to the federal funds rate. I've been looking, I talked a lot about affordability today, but I'm also starting to look at other affordability challenges in the housing market that affect home buyers and sellers, willingness to get into the market. Property taxes and homeowners insurance are becoming increasingly big challenges in the market. And so how those markets work over the coming year will also have an impact. I mentioned the new Fed chair got through Senate confirmation. That's good. I put the federal government up there. I said yesterday, I always put the federal government under the wild cards because maybe it's because I live here in the Washington, D.C. area and you never know. So just throw it in there because you never know what's going to happen in the federal government. I'm going to end here in just a minute. Happy to take comments, questions, Wes, through you or through the chat. We post data on the housing market every month, as well as every week on Tuesday mornings. We present data at the county level, and all of this data are available at brightmls.com/research. There's no login here. We make this available to our Bright MLS subscribers, but it's actually, you don't have to log in or anything. So this is public facing as well. And so please do check it out, and you can see the kinds of information that we have out there, results from our latest survey, some commentary, all sorts of other things. So with that, I want to thank you, Wes, again, and Rich, for the invitation to be all with you guys today. And Wes, happy to take questions and turn it back over to you.
Yeah, Lisa, excellent presentation. Thank you. Believe it or not, three questions, but they're all the same question that I received. How do we get your slides?
Uh-huh.
So I just let everybody know that there is a survey coming out afterwards. I'll be sent in a few minutes after. We actually have the slides as part of that survey, so you'll be able to download them right from that. But again, the recording for this presentation will also be able, you'll also be able to find it on DelawareRealtor.com / actually, I don't know why I said that because I don't know what the backslash is, but it's at a video library on our website. It'll be there in the next day or two. You can find the whole presentation. But Lisa, I got nothing else, no other questions. I think you did a great job. I think that gave us a great look at
Great.
what's ahead and what just happened. So we appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us. And I want to thank the Delaware Mortgage Bankers Association as well for partnering with us. So thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
Have a great spring.
Yeah. Have a good day,
Bye.
everyone. Bye-bye.